This is Moomen tonight. Welcome. Many thanks for joining us. We bring you the real stories. My environment alone will tell you that I'm rich. I've chosen to be in one of the very shallow pits. They also do have miscreants, but it doesn't mean that all of them are criminals. We do not have a good geodatabase of our mineral resources. This is a time for us to share the oil money. So terrorism is not going to be accepted on this continent. They see them coming here and I'll be back alive.
We're just about leaving on the night patrol with the AU forces here in Somalia.
The real issues, the real talk.
We are working together for the development of Ghana.
It means that we have separation of powers.
Already we're talking about moving from what? A deficit of some 9% to 6.5%.
The critical challenge that faces every leader in the world today is the issue of creating jobs.
We will put at least 1 million people to work.
Ghana, after 60 years, has a public structure that is not responsive.
Mr. President, I know this is your main issue why you came here.
Join me, Abdul-Hayi Moomen, the Men Tonight, from Monday to Friday, 8:15 p.m. to 9:15 p.m. on GBC24. Many thanks for joining us here on GBC24. This is Moomen Tonight. My name is Abdul-Hayi Moomen, and tonight we'll take a look at a matter that appears to be distant from us, but indeed is very close to us. You know, there has been grave concern over the apparent inability of African nations to boost trade among member countries, as it is common with other continental bodies. Now, it is important to realize that for Africa to foster economic growth and development, expansion of trade is not only key, but also very, very necessary. Now, unfortunately, Africa overly relies on other regional bodies, such as the European Union, for trade. Africa has therefore been identified as EU's fourth most important trading partner after the US, China, and Switzerland. With Brexit now a reality, one of the in the face is renegotiating trade terms with Britain on the one hand and the EU on the other. Now, in the face of this challenge, what opportunities are there when Britain fully secedes from the EU? These and many more are the questions that I'll be posing to my guest this evening. My guest this evening has flown all the way from the UK to join us in the studio tonight. He is Dr. Sharif from the University of Sheffield. He's actually a lecturer at the University of Sheffield, UK. He's a young Ghanaian. Thank you very much. I must say we are indeed very proud of people like you, a young man who has risen to one of the highest echelons of academia.
I'm humbled.
Tell me how you did it.
Well, that's quite a long story. We'll leave that for another program.
No, but tell me, I mean, it can't be that long. You're still a very young man, yeah. Probably maybe in your early 30s.
Yep.
And it can't be much older, have been able to summarize their story for us. Tell me how you did it, because we can't take it for granted that we have a lot of people out there who need inspiration. They just need to hear that story, which might inspire them to get to where you are or even beyond.
Well, it's about hard work and grace. Yeah. When that's combined, and you yield that sort of results.
You're still avoiding my question, aren't you? And I understand that because of, but I'm sure we'll get into those details. But you teach at
corporate governance and accounting. Yeah. So mainly I teach courses and advances in management accounting.
I would like you to speak. My producer tells me We can't hear you clearly.
Okay, yeah. I teach corporate governance. That's my main area of research. So I look at corporate governance from an international realm, where I look at issues from emerging markets and the developing markets to see how they sort of like affect everyday life in terms of accountability and transparency, and how that could that are sort of like, or economies that are designated as emerging into sort of like developed economies, because that's very key to every economy.
Right. When we were preparing for this program and following some of your works, found that you just returned to Ghana also from South Africa. You presented a paper on something that had to do with oil and gas.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so at the moment, and that's what has actually brought me around. We've got this project that's ongoing, which looks into the resource curse. So into the 10th anniversary of oil production in Ghana. So we want to look back. Okay, well, in the last 10 years, what have we achieved? Where are we now, and where are we going with oil and gas as far as its benefits to the people of Ghana is concerned? So are we, because there have been anecdotal voices without empirics that points to the fact that maybe we sort of like emulating Nigeria, and it's going to be a case of the resource care. So we want to really ascertain from an empirical perspective, so talking to stakeholders, as IEI, the international oil companies, and the stakeholders such as civil society and the likes of that, to really ascertain whether we are experiencing the resource curse, or it's just
I'm keenly waiting for the day we'll have the opportunity to have a discussion on the oil and gas sector, and especially on whether or not we will face a Nigerian kind of situation. But even before we move on to talk about the main reason why we invited you here, let's spend some talking about the oil and gas sector, because whenever this issue comes up, one of the main things that Ghanaians are concerned about is the local content bit. This local content bit, to some extent, has been misinterpreted by a lot of Ghanaians, and so we are looking at participating at the managerial level without the necessary expertise. And so where we are expected to have expertise, aspects, welding and so on, we don't have the experts there, and therefore we are not at the top, we are not at the middle. Even way down there, we have just few Ghanaians. Have I assessed the situation right?
Well, I think you have. Very critical. This afternoon I was engaged with an IOC, and we're just having these sort of discussions. Well, I mean, it's a highly technical industry, and 10 years into production, it's probably a very short time to sort of like develop that sort of technical human resource. Have a very significant level of employment opportunities as far as the technical aspects are concerned. But I think that they've got to be a conscious effort from the side of government also to look at sort of like developing that technical skill in the individual citizenry, and talk of like welding, divers, and then the other technical areas that are very rare, that can really create a platform or the very foundation to absorb the sort of local content that would embrace talking about. Because yes, a local content could exist in law, but if you don't have the technicalities, if you're not meeting the standards of the international oil and gas industry, how do you fit in? So it means that gap you've lucidly identified would definitely exist.
And like I said, we'll find time to discuss this issue in detail if you have the time to come back on our platform. But let's look at the main reason why you are here, which has to do with the Brexit. At the beginning of this conversation, I mentioned we usually would think that an issue like Brexit has to do with Britain and its EU partners, at best, the Western world. But for us here in Africa, what do we have to do with Brexit? But I'd like you to explain for us for the very basic things that one needs to know when we hear about Brexit. What is it?
Well, I mean, it's I think it's been ongoing for some time now. This is like Article 51 has been since they've been a very long marriage, over 3 decades of marriage, as I always put it, between Britain and the rest of Europe. Or Britain has been a part of, member states of the European Union. So they've decided to form a union. There's a long historic base to it with different treaties that we probably will not have time to digest. But Britain thought that, okay, well, there have been actually big debates about whether Britain is actually, EU, or depending on what sort of taxes it pays out to the EU, whatever trade relationship they have, and it had to come to a point that they have to trigger an article to go into a referendum. So they went into a referendum of yes or no as to whether to stay into the European Union. So the government was heavily divided at the time. So they needed to go back to the people and say, okay, well, do you really want us to be a part of this union? Do you want us to be a part of this custom union that allows free trade of goods and services, human movement, and all would make life easy within the EU? But you'd realize that over the years, some of the countries economically have not really been up and standing to sort of like, so it's sort of like the stronger economies cushioning the very tiny ones that are a bit fragile. So some citizens are not really very happy about that, thinking that, okay, well, why are you using our taxes to sort of like look after other countries when we have issues such as the NHS to look after and the like. It's a big debate. It's full of anecdotes. It's full of empirics. But the reality is that we are still at a stage where everything is not clear, even though it's like a few months down the line where we really proper say, okay, well, it's all over now, or we've crossed the Rubicon. This is what it says. So the EU, Britain is no longer a part of the EU. But I mean, considering the level of legislations, thousands of them, so it's really going to be a very long process, and looking up to untangling all of these issues as it moves on. But yes, the long and short of it is that Great Britain would not be part of the customs union of the EU or the economic trade union that it once belonged to. So due to several factors.
If I get you right, Britain no longer feels that it's
per the referendum,
that it's the EU had ceased. It feels that it had ceased to be mutually symbiotic, so to speak.
That's what some people think. As to how right that is another question. People think Brussels cannot be, Brussels cannot be calling the shots for London and all of that. So it's sort of like there is an element of nationalism to it. So there's an element of Euroscepticism to it. So it's
but Doc, when you sit where I am sitting, if we extend the same argument and we get to the United Nations, for example, then a lot of nations, the so-called G20, should all bow out using the same argument as Britain to leave the Brexit.
Well, it depends on where one sits. So it's got different angles to it. So you could sit somewhere and argue and make a point, and you build followers based on that.
I was in the UK. About 3 weeks ago, I was in the UK, and in my informal interaction with some of the British citizens, I got the feeling that some of them are beginning to regret the way they voted. You have just come from the UK. You feel same? You pick up that when you speak to people on the streets?
Informally, definitely. It's just like any elections. Even in national elections, when you go into the booth or the ballot and come out of it, there are times that you say, okay, well, I regret my vote. So definitely, once there's results and then there's reality, definitely there will be regrets and there will be joy. So depending on how you analyze the situation and how things really pan out at the end of the day. So, but
okay, so now let's look at it this way: that most of the trade agreements that Ghana, for instance, has with Britain were negotiated through the EU. Now that Britain is exiting the EU, how will it affect these negotiations, and if they're existing contracts, what will be the repercussions?
Well, I to be honest, when I get asked this question, I don't see much repercussions happening because there's not much on the table as we speak. Like
Really?
in terms of trade, yeah, there's not much on the table. So, but if we think there is much on the table, it's about time then Ghana or the rest of Africa or West Africa, because if you look at the relationship, West Africa became its leading trade partner, right? So, how will this be affected? That's a question we leave for tomorrow to see how things really pan out when we have a full Brexit. But I think because the relationship is not with Britain, it's with the EU. So if the EU still wants to maintain that sort of relationship with Ghana or the rest of Africa or West Africa within the West African sub-region, then fair enough. But I don't see much of it being distracted as it stands now, because fact that, well, if Britain leaves, then what it means is that all of this trade issues is going to cease. But then again, there's really going to be some impact. As to whether that's going to be minimal or enormous, that's something we need to look at.
I'm surprised that you kind of brush it aside, that people are concerned that Brexit will affect Ghana in particular, because for many Ghanaians, the first port of call to Europe is Britain, before Germany and Belgium and the rest.
How does that come in here?
I don't know. You tell us.
Yeah, because there's no way that's really going to affect it, because we're not part of the customs union of the EU. Yeah, Ghana exists as a country in isolation. We've got a special relationship through the Commonwealth, right? So
I'm looking at it in terms of business. When Ghanaian businessmen want to export items from Ghana, and recently I've been having engagements with the Free Zones Authority, who want to do businesses that you export over 70% and leave the rest of the 30 here in Ghana, and so Britain comes up tops among the nations, China and the rest of them.
Yeah, so it still holds a relationship with Ghana. Why would it lose it because of Brexit? Because it's only leaving a union, and Britain is having that relationship with Ghana not because it's a member of the EU. So I don't see that really affecting that relationship. So trade has got to go on as usual.
Yeah, but maybe,
of course, something dramatic happened post Brexit.
Let me ask you a question that probably I should have asked earlier, and which has got to do with Britain's relationship, even when it was a full member of the EU. We know that the EU at a point began to use the euro as its what's the term?
Currency.
As its currency. Britain alone stood by its currency, the pound sterling. It looks on the surface as though Britain has never really kowtowed to the whims and caprices of the EU to start with.
Well, I mean, that's a very different angle to the whole debate of it, because if you look at it, monetary politics is one leg of it, and that's like probably at 10% or less of the entirety of EU agreements whatsoever. So Britain still wanting to keep its pound unique and getting it going and getting it much stronger than the rest of the currency, and not trying to work economies or putting into a single monetary zone. Could be argued out in the very lucid terms and very convincing terms that this is how we want it. But if you look at Britain today, there's like a high influx of Europeans from Eastern Europe and other places that are there benefiting from the NHS, benefiting from social services. So that's really a great benefit to the economic union that has existed for the last 30 years plus ago.
The EU was known, or what is still known as the EPA, the Economic Partnership Agreement with African countries, some of which I know have already started. Okay, with the exit, when Britain eventually exits the EU, how will the EPA be affected?
Well, Britain is just one country out of many countries.
One strong country out of many weak ones.
Many weak ones. That's really very relative, because Britain is heavily dependent on some trade, vegetables and food stuff coming from other European countries. So you cannot really underestimate the strength of most of the countries in the EU, because they've got really very resilient economies, and they've actually, as you put it, there've been some symbiotic relationship in quotes and some mutual relationship existing among other countries as far as trade. So with Britain pulling out of it, we have no idea, as you and I sit in the studio as David Davids or whoever is Brexit leading the Brexit negotiations, what they are bringing to the table and what they are taking off. Westminster itself, or Number 10, is not pretty sure what package is going home with or what package is bringing to the table. So we'd really be speaking in a vacuum to determine what it's really going to be that if Britain eventually pulls out. I do not know what power Britain wields at the minute in terms of the EPA agreements, but I see it more of a European thing, or the European Union thing, than it being a British thing, or than it being a Great Britain thing. So if Britain is moving away, or post-Brexit, maybe not, the EU would want to really look at, okay, Britain is out now, so can we probably renegotiate our agreements? Can we have the revised, or we probably need to just maintain it how it is, unless of course Britain is holding a greater chunk of the trade relations that's really ongoing via or using the EU as a conduit. Either than that, then I don't really see much happening.
So
but at the moment, all the baskets are in the air. You really don't know how it's really going to look.
Which European country would you say that Ghana deals with more in terms of trade? Because when the issue of trade relations with Ghana came up, you didn't appear to suggest that we had very strong relationships. I mean, over there.
Well, we do have a strong relationship everywhere, as far as. But the point is, how much of our export do we have out there? That's a bigger question. I think probably this question should be posed to the trade minister, not really me.
No, but
to look at it,
yes.
But to look at it, and that's just on a lighter note. But to look at it in real, tangible terms, right? Little happening in terms of exports. So that's why I'm not really very enthused to think that that's really got a higher impact.
So this actually presents African countries, Ghana in particular, with an opportunity to renegotiate trade terms with Britain in particular.
Yeah, it can, or the rest of Europe.
Currently, would you be able to tell us how advantageous the current, arrangements are? Otherwise,
yeah, that's what I keep saying. That it's a very nuanced situation, and at the minute, Number 10 has no idea what it's going home with, or Brussels has no idea what the deal is going to be like, right? So, how do you come in? So, but this is what I've always advocated, to say, okay, well, as of now, African trade ministers, or for that matter, West African trade ministers, or Ghana as a country, if it has a special interest in this relationship, should have come out advancements to say, okay, well, this is what we gauge as the current situation of Brexit in the few months to happen, and if it did happen and it went this way, this is how things would be like. If it went the other way, this is how things would be like. I do not know if that's ongoing or not, right? But I think that all of these countries that have special relationship with the EU, or for that matter Britain, should probably start to measure their curtains to see where they can really get in, or where there's opportunity.
I find it curious, though. You say that Number 10 is still not sure what's going to come out with.
Yeah.
So, on what basis did they go for Brexit, the vote, the referendum in the first place?
Well, there's a clause that gives room for that. They had to, go through parliamentary proceedings and all of that.
No, but shouldn't the permutations have been done first of all, even before the consideration of a referendum came up for discussion?
You do permutation even in national elections, and you can have yourself not really cast in stone. Things turn around, especially in this fast global moving world. So it's a situation that's being faced. It has to be dealt with, and solutions have to happen, either being pragmatic, tough solutions, and If some have to be watered down, they've got to be watered down. But at the minute, things are really not clear
so let me
as
ask
to
you,
which direction it's going.
I'll ask you a very basic question. Probably I've asked again before, but TV set now and found two Ghanaians, one based in the UK and teaching in the UK, discussing Brexit on Ghana national television. What has this got to do with us?
Well, from where I sit, it's got a lot to do with us, and as you did say, maybe trade issues. I saw that you were, going on with this word of renegotiation.
Yes.
I'll be very careful with that. Renegotiate what? So this is what it has to be. Maybe we've probably got to step back and go like, okay, hang on a second. What is it that the EU needs, or what's the biggest market? Maybe it could be organic. So can we now really reposition ourselves to be a net exporter of organic grown foods into the European market or into the British market? Right. So if these are things that we really want to look back and reposition ourselves strategically for, then it means that we really, gauging into the threats and opportunities, and we want to really plug into them. But if we think it's business as usual, or maybe it's not really worth talking about this, then life goes on, and we miss probably another opportunity. There are really opportunities to look at. Maybe the trade ministry, and as you did mention, the free zones would probably have to start assessing the situation. Okay, well, if this breaks out, let me be quick to add this, that maybe a sort of excuse that most people give is distance in terms of exports into some European markets. But if you could have like beef coming from Australia into Britain, considering the distance from Australia into Britain and then that of most African countries, that is very feasible. Then again, you look at fresh flowers, which are probably the most perishable goods, leaving Kenya into the Netherlands through a very decent supply chain. So that tells you that there are really good opportunities if we put things together and get committed. But then again, how is trade like amongst African countries, amongst West African countries? That's reflective of the fact that we've got a formidable economic front as far as trade relations is concerned. I think I was in Nairobi, something really struck me, right? I was impressed by the immigration rules and everything, but then I, standing in a queue, trying to get through, proud African, then I saw different queues being created for diplomats, for other passport holders, and then the next was for Eastern and COMESA, that's Common Market for Southern Eastern African members. So you would see the fragmentation, right? West Africa was not represented. That was within an East African. I don't think this is, I'm not looking at it from a very negative perspective. It could probably...
But that's common in many airports.
Airports, yeah. So, but why can't an African just walk through? It was visa-free, but I had to probably join. Because I'm West African, I have to join other nationals. So what it means is that we're not really even giving significance to our own African economic trade relations whatsoever. Whereas if you were in a European country, in Britain, there is EU members, and then there are other nationals. So you'd see that all of these sort of labels that even happen at our national borders sort of present the situation as to how we look at things internally within the sub-regions. And well, yes, Africa could look at things from a different perspective. Then again, you come into Kotoka, where you also have West African citizens, having COMESA and East African citizens. So it just tells you how national borders.
We have the Continental Free Trade Agreement. It's still in its very early stages. But these issues you have raised, especially at the airports,
maybe in other parts of
you think it will be a hindrance to the success of the Continental Free Trade Agreement?
I can't say now because I have not really, I don't have much empirics to this effect, but this is the feeling I have that if we probably, and let me also add this point, or this fundamental point. I feel some people might disagree with me. Africa out there as we're just using the term loosely, it's sort of like viewed as a monolithic continent, sort of like one country in a way. I think it's a good thing. Why don't we make that as an advantage rather than fighting it and saying that we are many countries? Why don't we rather say, okay, well, we are a continent, and this is what we can do as a continent.
What can we do as a continent?
Right.
That is one question that I've never been able to receive an answer to, which I would describe as satisfactory.
Yeah.
What is it that we have as a continent? We are,
well,
it's easy for us to say we have gold, we have oil, we have diamond, and so on. And the story ends, you have that, and so what?
Are we going down this route? The point is, when you say you have everything, right, yet we're not there. I mean, the world is way advanced. These days I go like, okay, well, we're probably 100 years behind technology and the likes, but every technology in the world comes out of Africa, right? To most of the chips that works on computers and the likes. The mineral wealth is in the Congo and other places. But we've got to really be a part of this value chain, right? Localize some of these products in terms of manufacturing and what have you. But then again, it's just not about manufacturing and trade alone. There's a lot that comes into it. I've always maintained that we've got to a stage in global affairs where IP, intellectual property, has become like the biggest commodity than any other tangible good or whatsoever, which is why probably you've got Apple sitting in Silicon Valley, yet all the hardwares of Apple are manufactured in China. Really getting what it has to get out of Apple products in terms of benefits or greater benefits. So, as a continent, where are we? We've still got vast amounts of lands that we could go into, and I keep maintaining. It's probably a very boring example that I keep hammering around and has probably made a buzz out of. That if we probably say, look at, we've got organic grown foods, which is a big thing in European markets. You go out there, close to the quality we have here, right, which is being grown in the wild. How about if we say, okay, well, we want to really concentrate to become the biggest exporter of organic grown foods into, even the Chinese markets and the European markets. We can do it. And if we start to do it, then we're creating a decent value chain that's really going to have employment. You're going to have processing factories, you're going to have farms. So people are really going to be employed right from the ports, right? And there could probably be Ghanaian businesses in the diaspora that also has a way of also processing it. Then you come to a point, we look at cocoa. We've been exporting cocoa beans for God knows how long. Can something be done about it? Could we not be innovative about it? So instead of probably having heavy tongs of cocoa beans, maybe it's cheaper to have cocoa cakes, right? Process them into cakes. They are lighter and they could go out there, right? Used for chocolates. Maybe why don't we just go and then create a net market, right, for getting the cocoa processed into chocolate, and where the husk and whatsoever could be used for fertilizer and other stuff. So what it means is that we have to really reassess the situation and see what we need out of these resources for our own local markets, because we've got farmers. So if we're getting the fertilizers out of this and we send out the nets or the cakes into make the chocolates, then that really happened. But then again, the debate has always been very emotive. You have people saying, oh, we produce cocoa, but our kids can really have good, decent chocolate to eat and the likes. But we're forgetting that milk is an important ingredient to the manufacturing of cocoa. Do we have milk? So can we probably go out back to the CSRI whatsoever to get what sort of cows we can begin to grow if we really want to be a part of this big market or the manufacturing market as far as cocoa is concerned. But must a market really have to become the very primary consumer of its own goods? I don't think so. It depends on the kind of good it is. You probably go into a place like Korea, where Samsung phones are probably manufactured. But you go in there, and how many of the population or citizenry are on the Galaxy X8s and the 9s? They are all out there in other economies. So it still tells you that a country must not really be a primary consumer of its own. It depends on the kind of good it is. Well, it's a nice thing to have it because
okay.
Yeah.
I just received some messages here. I will not read them verbatim, but one of the concerns is, and I've been asked to ask you this question, that is it not also the case that Britain may have opted to leave the EU because Eastern European countries had begun to have their citizens invade Britain and taking opportunities away from the indigenous British people?
Well, that's another level of an emotive argument that we would want to probably have till the cows come home. I don't want to sound derogatory towards any nationality whatsoever. Well, we all know how hard Eastern Europeans work as well, so I don't really think that there's free movement as far, and Britain knew this before, joining the customs union of it, which allowed the free movement of citizens. And
they knew that before, and now they are regretting probably the decision to allow free movement.
Well, I think with all of these happening, someone has got to point to us evidence of how lazy these people are probably, or how they've taken advantage of the system and not contributing to it. If they point us to the evidence, then we can. But at the minute, I don't have such evidence, and it's going to be difficult to really pigeonhole a particular sort of like a cluster of people and say, okay, well, it's because of X people that you have this happening. It's part of the debate. It's part of the debate. I call that it's part of the pub debate, but you don't really want to.
I like the pub debate.
Yeah.
But when you listen to the other members of the EU Brexit, generally, what impressions do you form?
Well, then again, it's just unfortunate that all of the arguments and the proponents, even with leading politicians taking up this debate and campaign, has all been, excuse me to say, anecdotal. Again, because no one is pointing to the empirics. Now, the biggest debate that was really happening, or the biggest campaign, was that the NHS was suffering, which is a national pride of Britain, if you know, and disentangled from the EU, that money would be saved to save of the the NHS, or to close up the black hole within the NHS. Well, that's not going to happen, because recently the head of Treasury has come out to say, okay, well, the NHS need probably 20 billion or 20 plus billion to get going greater and greater, but we don't know where the money is coming from, right? And it's all pointing to from taxes. So where's the EU money? So you'd see,
question. Where's the EU money? You tell us.
I don't know.
No, but if
maybe we've got to get someone from Whitehall.
The money that Britain was paying to Brussels will be saved. We should be able to tell where that money has been saved and how much has been saved.
I have no idea. Next time you should bring the British High Commissioner in, and he's probably going to get.
I'm hoping
or a trade attaché.
But in all of this, what lessons, and as we wrap West Africa as a body learn from the proposed, and indeed is going to happen, exit of Britain.
Yes, eminent.
So what lessons can we learn?
Yeah. So well, what it says is that I'd share a harrowing experience that I've had. I think I was at this program and this parliamentarian came in. I got really very jittery, like ever since
a Ghanaian
this whole,
parliamentarian?
No, a British parliamentarian. And I was like, okay, well, so question time came in, and I went, okay, so this is what is happening. And ever since Brexit came up, no one is talking Africa, right? What's happening? Then he was like, okay, well, we're too busy untangling the legislations, and I don't think for the next 2 to 10 years Africa would be on the table. Right. So what it means is that we've just always been on the periphery, and it's sort of looked like we. You sound very negative. I don't want to. I want to sound as positive as.
No,
I
but
can.
if it is negative, you have to let us know.
No, yeah. So I just think that it's about time we up our game in all of this, right? So as Brexit was ongoing, maybe Africa would have also organized a sort of Brexit conference to tell the world or to tell Europe or Britain that we are preparing or we are getting in readiness of what we can bring to you, or the opportunities we can create for you. That has not happened, right? I don't know what sort of assessment that's being done or being given to, but I think this is all there's a PR element to it, there is a political strategy element to it, there is an international trade element to it, right? So and there is a hegemonic power display element to it.
Doc,
so until we begin to display and know when to sort of like play out these things really very well on the international stage.
To that question, Doc, because almost simultaneously at the same time that the Brexit debate had started, there was a debate going on in West Africa about Morocco joining the ECOWAS. And so Morocco is a big player in Africa by all standards, but one big player in Europe was exiting. Another big player in Africa wanted to join a continental subgroup. And I'm just saying, were there any lessons for us to learn at the time? And I don't know as we speak whether the Moroccan idea has completely been shelved.
Well, I'm quite skeptical about the Moroccan idea. I don't know what's really informing it, but some questions need to be answered to enhance the debate around the Moroccan issue, right? Then again, West Africa. Well, some people say, okay, if Morocco joined, so what? If they didn't join, so what? So they don't destroy anything. So why don't we allow them? But the fundamental questions to ask is that what's the ECOWAS? Is it an economic union? Is it a cultural zone? Is it because of proximity of nations or nation states that share borders that this corridor of trade, or for that matter, this sort of like subcontinental trade levels are happening? What is it that you could have a North African country traveling as long as whatever it is? So until we really begin to unpack these questions, sense of ECOWAS is, it becomes very difficult to know where Morocco would sit in or what it actually brings into the table if it becomes a member of the ECOWAS. It could be very welcoming to say, okay, well, it's not really a matter of culture, it's not really a matter of proximity of borders or whatsoever, but it's just sort of like a committee of like-minded trade countries that really want to their economic integration is concerned. If that's what it is, why not? But as I said, there's more to it than meets the eye as far as Morocco would be concerned.
And as we wrap up, I'd like us to go back to the issue of the Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is an African thing, and the fact that Nigeria, a strong player in Africa,
I love that country to bits.
Tell me about Nigeria not interested in the Continental Trade Agreement and how affect this integration of Africa.
It would, because in the sense Nigeria has got one trump card that no country has in Africa and beyond, in a way, apart from probably China, which is population. Because it's hitting probably 200 million at the minute.
The US is over 300 million?
Sorry?
The US is over 300 million.
The US is very far.
We have more than 1 billion people in India. And so on.
No,
so,
I'm just talking about African continent.
Right.
Yeah, so I'm not bringing the picture of in terms of this. And that's what do you call it? Population size in and of itself is a big trend for Nigeria and how it's going to use it, right? Which is why you can have companies like MTN and the likes operating in Nigeria, the big economy where erratic power supply, and they're still doing well because the population size is it's an advantage that we don't have in compared to countries like Ghana with just 30 million. But we're talking about a population size about 200 million or plus, right? So Nigeria already has an advantage that it can play around as far as the West African sub-region is concerned or the AU is concerned. So that in and of itself, it's a big trend. They are a big player in OPEC as well. So in terms of looking at it from a very with so many varied economic variables, right? Nigeria stands a strong tilting the plates, right, to really get this going well or not going well. Maybe Nigeria is probably trying to be strategic about things and get to attract something to itself other than not being a part of this. So it's, as I said, there's a big gameplay when it comes to international trade. You could see Donald Trump trying to make a big issue about the European market and the steel market, and different responses coming from different corridors. It could be Nigeria could have something up to its sleeves, but I think that it's a big player as far as Africa is concerned, just as you mentioned, as India's population as well, which plays a very integral role as far as international trade is concerned. And India is actually doing very well with Britain, right? It's also got different trade agreements. But again, as you mentioned, Morocco coming into the West Africans, one of the models that you that did not really join the EU, but still has a separate economic agreements ongoing. We could probably have that with Morocco without it necessarily saying it's part of
Doc,
the West African.
we've run out of time, but again, just before we go, some of the messages I'm getting here, and I'd like to just summarize them. Key among them is the fact that people are asking me to ask you. You are here talking about trade agreements, talking about Brexit, advantages Africa, opportunities Africa can get from all of this, but you yourself, a young academic, brilliant brain, you're not contributing your quota to Ghana. You are in Britain. Basically that's what they're asking.
That's what they're asking. Oh, okay, that's really quite an interesting question. Maybe it's time to clear the air, right? I probably make as many trips into Ghana than any other country. Right, I seek research funding for Ghana. When I say for Ghana, most of my, which is why I'm here today. So I make a lot of entries into Ghana to conduct research, publish in the very leading journals that are being read around the world, do impacts, engage governments, engage government institutions and the like. So being an academic, sitting in one country, does not necessarily mean you don't contribute your quota. I probably contribute my quota more to Ghana than it's just me physically living in Britain. But as far as academic output is concerned, I'm probably country. So I'm doing the contribution. So tell them that I'm doing the contribution.
How long are you staying? So we can talk to you on oil and gas. If we have
I'm still around for a couple of days. So we probably.
Days. Okay, we'll see about that. Dr. Sharif Mahmud Khalid is a lecturer at the University of Sheffield in the UK, and he's been talking to us about the Brexit opportunities or threats to Africa. Thank you very much once again, Doc.
Thank you.
We'll see you again tomorrow when we bring you another edition of Moomen Tonight. You have a very good night. News comes up at
we bring you the real stories.
Abdullah, have you put the pen in the tea?
My environment alone will tell you that I'm rich.
I've chosen to be in one of the very shallow pits.
They also do have migrants, but it doesn't mean that all of them are criminals.
Have a good geodatabase of our mineral resources.
This is a time for us to share the oil money.
So terrorism is not going to be accepted on this continent.
If they see them coming here and going back there, they'll be killed.
But God willing, I'll be back alive.
We're just about leaving on the night patrol with the AU forces here in Somalia.
The real issues.
Together
together for the development of Ghana.
It means that we have separation of powers.
Already we're talking about moving from what? A deficit of some 9% to 6.5%.
The critical challenge that faces every leader in the world today is the issue of creating jobs.
We will put at least 1 million people to work.
Ghana, after 60 years, public structure that is not responsive.
Mr. President, please, I know this is your main issue why you came here.
Join me, Abdul-Hayi Moomen.
Moomen tonight, from Monday to Friday, 8:15 p.m. to 9:15 p.m. on GBC24.